about Chuck Schumer and the Democrats if they're willing to force a partial government shutdown rather than ensure that only American citizens are casting votes in the upcoming election. It reveals exactly what their priorities are and what their plan is.
Let me expand on some of the suffering you were just talking about. A scathing report on Joe Biden's botched Afghanistan withdrawal, and Kamala Harris's, because she was the last one in the room, as you know. It reveals Biden was hell-bent on leaving Afghanistan, ignoring military advice and NATO's objections. It also revealed that the State Department, I should say, failed to have an evacuation plan, despite knowing Afghanistan would fall to the terrorist Taliban. Americans died and were left behind in the worst foreign policy defeat for the United States in the modern era. Senator, when will anybody be held accountable for that?
It's not going to happen as long as Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are in charge of the executive. It's not going to happen as long as Chuck Schumer is the Senate Majority Leader, because the Democrats don't want any accountability. Look, I think we should have had multiple hearings over the disaster, the catastrophe that was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. It led to the deaths, to the murders of 13 servicemen and women because of the incompetence and the political ideology of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And yet in the Senate, Democrats control every committee. They don't want to have hearings. They don't want to have accountability. Nobody resigned. Nobody was fired. Nobody took responsibility. And in fact, the Kamala Harris, Joe Biden White House says that it was a tremendous success. All of us saw the images of planes taking off, people desperately grabbing at the wheels. We saw Americans killed. We saw Afghans killed. We saw absolute catastrophe. Why? Because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris put partisan politics above everything else. Because Biden wanted to announce that he was out of Afghanistan on the anniversary of September 11th. And even though the military said, look, you can't do an evacuation if you give up Bagram Airfield. Bagram Airfield is a secure airfield. If we're going to do an evacuation, let's do it where we can keep people safe. And the Biden-Harris White House said, no, politics is more important. Hand over the airfield. And so instead they did the evacuation from Kabul International Airport, which is in a dense urban environment. It is why 13 servicemen and women were murdered because of the catastrophic mistakes Joe Biden and Kamala Harris made.
Right, and leaving thousands of American citizens and vetted Afghan allies behind in the process. Senator, I've said this before, you and I are both Texans, and I find very little that you and I disagree on. As a matter of fact, I always tell that to anybody I've been talking with about your policies. And you also know very well the law and the Constitution. And there was a major breaking story late last week. Our friends over at Louder with Crowder, their crew, releasing shocking video from a guy by the name of Nicholas Biase. He's the Chief Public Information Officer for the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. In that video, he all but admitted the lawfare cases against President Trump, weaponized, unfair, travesties of justice, his own words. Your reaction, and should taxpayers fund this corrupt malfeasance in our own government?
Yeah, look, it was a stunning expose. So this is the chief spokesperson for the Southern District of New York, which is the top federal prosecutor in New York City. And he was caught on hidden camera talking about Alvin Bragg's weaponization of the Justice Department, and he talks about weaponization of the District Attorney's Office, rather, and he talks about how it's a travesty of justice. It was utterly corrupt. And it is exactly that. That is the truth. And Chris, we have seen a pattern in the last 4 years of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris weaponizing the federal government, using the Department of Justice, using the FBI to go after their enemies, chief among them Donald Trump, and indicting the president. Democrat prosecutors have indicted the president now 4 separate times. That's never happened in our nation's history. You know, the reason they're doing this, Chris, is because they're terrified of the voters. There is an irony. I got to say, Sigmund Freud, I think, is rolling over in his grave because Democrats engage in psychological projection. They say they are defending democracy, and every one of these prosecutions is an attack on democracy. The reason they're bringing them is they're terrified the voters will vote for their opponent.